Buonasera.
Good evening.
Buonasera.
Good evening, everybody.
Buonasera, mi
So,
presento.
good evening. My name is Angela Mauro. I work in Brussels as a correspondent and reporter for HuffPost, and it is a pleasure to me to introduce this event and discuss the future of European Union. Let's hope with some wonderful guests and also with a wonderful audience as well. I am very sure about that because the audience of Fondazione Feltrinelli is always so curious and informed. As you know, the topic is global disorder. Can Europe resist to its own position? So this is also giving us an opportunity. On the one hand, we have an act just for Europe in an unstable world, and on the other hand, we have Europe which has to face internal tensions, and we are doing that in the final conference, which is celebrating the solid project that during these last 6 years set the target of investigating crisis on what we could describe as the policrisis of these 15 years, the crisis, euro crisis, the migrant crisis, then COVID, energy shock, and the Ukraine war, with all the consequences that we know: social crisis, the crisis politics, and crisis of the state of right. So I would invite here on stage Maurizio Ferreira, one of the three researchers that committed to this course, which was developed between 2019 and 2015, promoted by the European University Institute, the LSE, and University of Milan, and also Fondazione Feltrinelli. Please. It's a good evening. I would just welcome you all here, and I will thank you for being here. And as said, this is an event, a public event, which is open, which is marking the closure of this project, which is sovereignty, identity, and solidarity in the EU, starting from 2009, so the very beginning of the financial crisis, which is concluding at the end of this month. So here in the conference room, lots of the researchers, the participants, and my colleagues, like the principal investigators, we have, like, they took part to this project, and today and tomorrow morning we are having some more limited and restricted seminars with a group of experts and researchers of EU, both from EU and the US, to discuss with them the most scientific and academic results of our researches. So you should have found some leaflets which are summarizing the most important products that we published during these 6 years. So this evening, we said the topic is more on the challenges that are related to the present and also on future scenarios. And most of all, if we consider the huge threat of European safety, which is coming from outside, so the trio, Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping, which is questioning something that for many decades, safety and security, was taken for granted thanks to the umbrella concept of the NATO and the American approach also. So before I give the floor and the chairs literally to the participants of this round table, of this discussion, I would only like to point out and summarize one of the most important theses and targets as for the research that inspired our project, meaning the coexistence in these 15 years of crisis, one after the other, of two elements which are contradictory elements, at least a bit, inside of the European political system. On the one hand, we have some fragility, institutional fragility and political fragility, which led, in some moments, the entire Union to the brim of disintegration, and on the other hand, we have an astonishing resilience. The European Union is still alive, so the ability of solve the challenges, both for the functional aspect as for the policies, maybe not perfect, but still they limited and mitigated the economic and social effects of this crisis, but also from the political point of view. So the reply, so to say, to crisis led also to the identification of answers, led to some very strong conflicts among member states. So our starting hypothesis that we have been exploring empirically is that there is like a link between the fragility on the one hand and resilience on the other hand. And how is this link working, this mechanism, which is connecting the two aspects? It is as due to the fragility and also to the trend inside of the policies of the European Union that some sequences, some episodes of politicization of the policies, so the basis elements of the political system of the European Union, so not only the policies but also on the polities, so also the accepting of authorities, the legitimization of borders, and also the desirability of forms of mutual support. So these were converted into politics, bringing the EU to what I called before as a precipice, as a cliff. So it is as the exponents in the national main cities, they perceived this risk of disintegration and also this fall of the European Union during these moments of politicization of the policies. And the credible risk is something that is related to all federal states, US, and other situations. But this is not the case. Maybe this happened in the past, but right now we do not have the risk anymore of a deep crisis, which is then or also directed to the basis of the polity. But this is the case for EU, so the huge dimension of this risk led political exponents to move from the policy-making level to a meta level that we called polity maintenance. So the maintenance of the European Union as per se. So solutions were selected. We didn't consider some of them, and we accepted some others, thanks to their promise to keep together the EU, not considering, also considering the differences and also the politicization, which is very strong. And we tried to adopt this perspective in order to identify and explain these moments, explain their logics. And this attention, this focus between fragility and resilience is still there. So some of the reforms that were introduced strengthen the European Union. Let's think, for example, to the answers to the pandemic, but also the structural tension, let me use these words, is still there. So the question of today is, considering the growing importance of this external challenge, which is so huge, this tension will be able to avoid the break, thanks to which tools and instruments, and also to manage the unavoidable conflicts that again, and in part they are still exploded, if we compare that to the founding pillars of the European project. So this is very heavy question that not mandatory should be discussed this evening, but I leave here as the background as for your discussion. So thank you very much, and I wish you fruitful proceeding and fruitful discussion to the participants. Thank you very much. And I am inviting here on stage the participants of the discussion, starting from Sylvie Goulard. You know her. She is professor of practicing at Bocconi University and vice president of the Institute of Policy Making, and also foreign ministry parliament, and she has deep knowledge of European dynamics. Then we have Eric Jones, director of the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies, and with remote connection we have Giovanni Capoccia, professor of comparative politics at the Department of Politics and International Relations at the Oxford University. So these are the institutions, foreign institutions or international institutions. English is doing fine for this round. So we decided to split this discussion in different points. So EU is the result of policrisis in three different parts. One is dedicated to institutions, so how these emergencies changed and if they changed the architecture, the European architecture. And the other block is related to solidarity and trust, if there was an impact. I do think personally that there are many impacts. So what was the impact on the political dimension and social of integration in the trust relationship between European institutions and European citizens? So today I'm just adding some data just for your knowledge. I'm not sure that you followed the newspapers. So there was another case of corruption in Brussels that just came out, which is related to Federica Mogherini, so director of the European College, which is absolutely important for integrated study in Europe. So this seat is located in Bruges, but also in Poland and in Albania, and this is very crucial to the training of these people. And also Sannino is included in this case. So regardless of the consequences of the report on the case, because this will be analyzed further on, it is very important to mention the damage of the image. So it is also stunning the fact that they started attacking European Union once again, so from Orban supporters and Russian from Moscow. And maybe both parts are interested in fragmenting the European Union. Then we have the third pillar, the third area, which is related to the future of the Union, with a focus on vulnerabilities and tools and instruments which are needed in order to tackle the world which is coming. So Goulard, I'll start with you for a reflection on the tools that we have, so to say, which are temporary tools that European Union came up with these last years, most of all with the Ukraine crisis and also with the COVID pandemic, in order to overcome emergencies. Let's consider the next generation EU. I would consider that as a temporary and non-replicable tools, or also this facility with which we are giving money to Ukraine. So do you think that these tools are representing something they could be permanent, and also considering the actual political situation which is more leaning to the movements of non-European supporting parties. Do you think it is possible to have this kind of reasoning?
Allora, prima di tutto, grazie, grazie
So first
dell'invito.
of all, thank you for inviting me here. And on this point, I would say that we should avoid some institutional discussion with a never-ending discussion, because this is not really interesting to anyone, and we do not have time for that. So I will focus on the situation. So it is not only a simple crisis, it is a turning point, a generational change. So the fact of having war in Europe, so to have at least uncertainties. We do not know how US will define the end, but what we saw some days ago with the peace plan, we do not know that this was written in Washington, in Moscow, and we were not there. So we are finding ourselves in an unforeseen situation, and we have to tackle huge challenges. So it is not enough to go to Brussels and say, I would like to defend national interest, because if Germany is attacked by Putin, it seems like that this is not a good news for northern part of Italy. So there is an interconnection, and I would start with this interdependence, also considering that we can say we are grateful to the job that has been done between France and Germany after the Second World War in order to have better relationships, and this led to a unique result in the world. China and Japan didn't start yet, so we do have some know-how, we can say that, but starting from the situation of today, of the threats of today, and not always be speaking about ourselves and considering that the enemies are in Brussels or in other countries, in third countries, and they do have weapons at hand. And also, to add a footnote, Putin is having some financial difficulties, so it is difficult to know what are the problems and difficulties, but he's ready to sacrifice the young people and also the ability of production. If we take the tanks into account, the production is way higher if compared to ours, so this is the addition of different programs, and also very higher than what he had at the very beginning of the war in 2022, because the war, when they reached Ukraine, it seems like it was a short war that he would have won in a very short time, but I am focusing on that, so it is no more time of the theoretical approaches and reasoning, but at the end of the day, are we together or are we not together against third parties? So this is the question. So if we can find a solution, and I do hope we can have a cooperation solution among us, then we will also have the way to go on further. And also in the same time, the Commission is right, so to use all the tools and instruments available. And as you said, there are some things that were done in the past. Then when the situation is hard, it is extremely important to verify what we call the accountability. In English, see the way in which money is used, is there is a control, the peace facility, then it is something which is only in the hands of the council, so governments. And if there are some errors, if there is some corruption or something is wrong, we have to control what we do. So at this moment, I could divert my question to Eric Jones as for the use of Russian assets, but we will come to that point later, because at this moment I will consider the institutional architecture and the general reasoning on how EU is tackling to crisis situation, and if this is a fragmentation scenario that we are considering, and if in 2029 we will have some majorities of extreme right hand which are opposed to European integration, and in that moment it would not be possible to do something or anything, or if we have to believe to the very same old motto that in crisis European Union is then able to find an answer. Is it still actual and valid?
Prima di tutto vorrei ringraziare tutti voi per...
First of all, I'd like to thank you all to listen to my Italian words, and also I would also like to congratulate to say congratulations to my colleagues that carried out this very important work for us today. So it couldn't be more important to know more details about solidarity. So when Sylvia said we are together or are we not together against third parties, so this is the idea, the basic idea of solidarity, and we have to choose that thing, and this is the most important point. But then there is another point. Who are we actually? When we speak about extreme right hand, so they are part of ourselves, or are they aliens who just landed on Earth from Mars? So I do think they are related to us. So we have to find a way in which we can work with the extreme right and convince them that they have to be together with us against third parties. And this is the problem. So we need some topics and points in order to convince them to be together with us and to stay there with us. And I do not think that we came up with these topics because we have always been thinking that they are a different power, different force for ourselves inside, like in the domestic politics. But this is not a matter of domestic policy. So this is considering against third parties. So when you ask me if Europe is able to come out of the crisis solution, so I am convinced from the words of Maurizio that there is some connection between fragility and resilience. So it doesn't mean that resilience is always winning. It can also be that fragility is winning. And what are we actually doing without Europe? What are we doing with Russia? And as, for example, what can we do with the United States, which are killing people which could be innocent on boats in the international ocean without any war? So this is a very strange thing to say US in that way. What are we doing? We would like to compare them and to confront them alone as Italian representing the center or the left, right? Because we are a limited group. No, we have to confront United States as European people, and to work and to act as European. We have to overcome these elections of 2027 in France. So we have to go over and beyond these elections. So it doesn't matter if Le Pen or the other representatives are winning, but this is the matter. What are we doing and how are we doing that? So considering your discussion, then maybe in the second round of question you can add something more. So is there maybe the risk that the real focal point is not without Europe, but will be which Europe? Because it is also true that these right hands that are in the past were against Euros or against European, as Le Pen or the very same Meloni, right now they changed approach. They are not speaking against Euro, not at least in a direct way. They are not speaking against the European Union. So they became, so to say, in part of the system. But Meloni, yes, as starting from the moment which she has entered and started the government, but maybe like traits of Europe are changing since this very moment. As for the laws for immigration that are undergoing some changes, and then there are some centers in Albania or the idea some ideas related to Rwanda, and in this case we are changing European laws. So Professor Capoccia, the question is addressed to you. So the point is that no more what Europe instead of without Europe. Is it worth? So I do am a strong supporter of European Union, but is it worth enough to be together if the price is so high? So if the details of the value of the European Union are changed? So thank you for your question. I wanted to start with some thank you words and also the words said by the colleagues for inviting me here, and something this is absolutely important, even more important if compared to the moment in which we start thinking about this project. So which Europe? So I wouldn't be so optimistic as for the management of the right, the extreme right, if compared to the European project, and also the ability of convince them. So there are also three different groups. We have the radical, the extremist, as these were called, but there are many different parliament groups. Is it true that it seems like some of these are addressed to change politics and also migrations and politics and solutions, but others, as for example Le Pen or others, it seems like the other are more interested in weakness of the European approach. So this is no more related to Euro, because Le Pen is changing their approach according to what is more profitable for the situation, and the French public opinion is worried by the party which is facing to the government, but also the position of the European Commission should be nothing other than related to the European Council. This means to recombine the powers of the European Union. And yeah, Professor, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Professor, can you hear us? So if, like, we consider the elections in 2027, then it seems like it is not so clear to be together. So I do think that European Union will have some weaknesses and fragility on that. Professor, I was saying, if you can hear me for the next round, if you have some headphones, it would be great to speak closer to the microphones, because there were some problems with the audio. Yeah, may I add something about France? So I would like to say something more about France. So for sure, those who are reaching the power and leading the power, they are discovering all the difficulties in having this power and the situations, but we shouldn't think that this would be like a different change. The first reason is French institutions, the winner takes all. It is as in the United States, this is a presidential election. So there is not a representative of the government, a head of state, which, for example, Sergio Mattarella, which in a very clear way is managing the balances of the constitution in Italy or in Germany with this time my president. So first thing, institutions are very dangerous for the presence of power, also for the moment of Mitterrand, in which there was the Liquidità Permanente, a book that was published and released. When there are people with this authoritative program, then this is more difficult. Then the second thing, the bank of Ms. Le Pen was in Russia. So the reason for which we all, and I say we all, have to do something more is not to attribute the guilt to the voters, because we do not have to split the citizens. So some citizens can't find their home, they are angry, they can't get to the health system, but it is up to ourselves to have some meaningful proposals and offers, because at the end of the day, the risk that we have is that the common currency that we have is in the end that people that are not representing our European plans. So it is no more enough to be against in order to make European Union to live. So it is as in a family. It is not enough to say I'm going out in order to have just an happy life. So there is a catch here. So thinking about it is not a big deal. So I can get to the National Recovery Resilient Plans, I can have some funds or some prestige when there is the presidency, but I am doing nothing. So in this case, we are going everywhere. And Jones, back to you, since we mentioned the topic of money, which is crucial, or one of the crucial points, considering the difficulty of the European Union to create another next generation EU, which is allowing to everybody to go on, or also to run at the very same speed. This was the original intentions of the next generation EU. So the difficulty also, considering Russia, for example, to bring on and bring forward some topics and to gain the public opinion, is clear. As for the discussion on money for Ukraine, there is no money. Starting from the Merz Chancellor, nobody would like to explain this emergency, this European emergency, that we need to find money for Ukraine up to the moment in which we are considering some ideas on which central bank is that we can't use that. So, for example, the use of Russian assets blocked at the beginning of the war in order to guarantee some loan to Ukraine, and this is exposing also the financial system to some legal rights, which is reporting to the European Union and also Belgium. So I'm not asking you for the solution because this should be too complicated for everybody, but don't you think that, for example, we are a bit beyond the problem of having to explain to the public opinion some emergencies? It is not that we can't keep up with all these problems, and in order to solve this problem that this popped in our hands. The problem is not complicated. The problem is very simple. We wouldn't spend some money in order to solve problems of Ukraine. This is it. We would spend monies of other people, so we try to spend the other money, even we do not consider the fact that these are not our money. But we do have some money to spend for Ukraine. Let's think. Public debt, American public debt, is shrinking in a crazy way, up to 120, 150% of the GDP, more than Italy. Public debt, the average level for the European Union is 80%. So it is not 300 or 300% of the GDP, it's not the US, it is about 80%. So we can say there is not 1% of the European GDP to spend for Ukraine that we can take from the markets to use for other situations. This, yes, absolutely. We do have this 1%. It would be very easy to find it and to use it. The problem is that we do not want to share expenses for this 1% of the GDP, and we have, of course, to explain better what is happening in Ukraine right now and what will happen if the Ukraine is falling again in the war with Russia. So let's think, will it be less or more Ukrainian corruption if Zelensky is losing power and Russian are taking over all countries? I think more corruption, more criminality, more migration, more violent aggressions. Then there is also the possibility that Ukraine is deciding that Europeans didn't do their part and they do have to sign a peace with Russian. So what are we doing if Russian and Ukraine are together against us? What do we think about this 1% of the GDP that we were able to spend? We have to explain this. We have to solve the easy problem, not a technical problem, very complicated, nobody is understanding. We have to understand the problem that is just in front of our face. So if we do not solve that on time, we are losing time to solve this problem. Goulart, you wanted to say something? I wanted to say that I do agree about the fact that the risk is so huge, the danger is so huge that this costs of not acting are even higher than what we think. But we also have to consider something. Permanently in Europe, we speak about the national or European level, and we have an average, but there is not an European GDP or an economic government of Europe which made some collective decisions reaching to 80%. The figures are right, but the reality is not that one. And honestly, in Germany, I do not agree the fact that Chancellor Merz didn't say their own part. He clearly stated that Germany will have the biggest army in Europe. So Germany is moving at a speed and with some action ability. So I'm not afraid of Germany, but this is a fact. As for defense, Germany is doing its part. But why is it doing its part? And I'm doing that as for French, because French and Italians, we were not trustworthy. Maybe they have more money. They have more money. They took for seriously, so their public debt is the 50% of our, and they also has the commitment that we have, so they don't insult to injury. So in Germany, if you say it is not fair, they have more capacity. So they also gave up some investments. I don't know if you already took the train in Germany, which is running late because no works have been done since decades. So I do take this for seriously. So I'm very worried about what's happening in my country, because in my country, in this moment, there is not at all an awareness as for the severity of the situation. So they do not have a Mario Monti, which is creating a retirement scheme reform in 2 weeks with a high commitment. So we do have a country which is going on, and then we have this flat surface between Moscow and Berlin, which is the east surface, the east territory. So we have to stop asking for Eurobonds and common debt up to the moment in which in France and in Italy we are serious. This will not happen, and the result is that Germany will go on and is not able to go on completely alone. So this is the level of public debt and of what is happening. Then we have companies. Germany has the biggest industry sector network, biggest of the union, and is using this in order to transfer their energy. So if you consider the environmental figures in the biggest part of this structure, I'm not able to pronounce Italian very well since I've been speaking German for these last days. So we have all this part of Europe which is asking only one thing, the representative of Italy and Germany. And the challenge is that ability of getting back to the unity. And I'm saying that without any fear of Germany, up to the moment in which the Germany, we know if it is something different with FSD or other things, I couldn't say that other things that we do need to understand what's happening right now. And I do think that political debates of our two countries, as for this moment, they are not reflecting and representing what's happening right now in the world. So, once again, I'm being very precise and offering you these things starting from Giovanni Capoccia. So it is not a threat that this strongest army of Europe that Germany is building and is creating, then this will be considered as the availability of a government guided and led by the AfD, because in the service 40% in Saxony, which will host some elections next year, and also some East Länder, German states. And another thing is that all countries, all states, or are set, as you said, for Italy and France, are not going on with the European defense. I wouldn't say that France is not at a standstill on the defense. France has also to consider also nuclear things. So this, of course, it's up to choice. So let's stop to ask for Eurobonds up to the moment which we can recognize the situation. But it is not a problem that we are not applying the approach of Draghi, which is highlighting some common financing solutions in order to finance what we have for digital, for defense, in order to catch up with some competitiveness. So I started from AfD in order not to say, is that maybe something which is making us afraid for our future, because maybe we will have some states which just went beyond others in order to strengthen the differences between the 27 states. Capoccia, back to you. I'm sorry about the technical questions and technical approaches that we had. So I'm sorry that I didn't listen to what you said during these last minutes. As for the lack of awareness on the European level, on the existential level we are living, and I do agree with you, when we are facing this situation, let's consider the things in the order. The lack of awareness is also related to the fact that there is not a real European debate and discussion, so there is not an public sphere of debate in which citizens are able to discuss about common problems. As said before, the current situation is still highlighting that even more. We have some points as for industrialization and also for the security of some centers. So there are some European traits, but there is not a European politics that can't be discussed at the level of the single problems and states. As for the immediate problems with the reduction of budget that are characterizing these for the national level, then we have different things. So considering what you said about the German situation and also the fact of being afraid of the AfD that will be managing this rearmed Germany, so this is a risk that we have to run. I don't know if you mentioned that, maybe we will mention that later on, but in Germany, for example, more than in other European countries, there is the idea of accepting that AfD is getting to the government is not there. So there is a political attention which is excluding some disagreement from the situation, and the situation is still under monitoring. There are some discussions as for the need of limiting or legally fighting the party. So I do not think there is a way out. So rearm is something that is undergoing, and there are no alternatives on that. Thank you. Goulart, since we mentioned US that are decommitting from Europe, and I also add that US of Trump are like acting as attackers against Europe. So how do you consider this state of the situation of the European management if compared to Western? It is clear that they don't trust other people and other realities. So maybe 10 seconds on AfD, as much as you like, because the topic is meant to connect to the fact that if we do not invest, if we do not put into practice the Draghi plan, we can't limit that other thing. But in Germany, this is upside down. So AfD was created by economy professors, and then this went in other hands. So economy professors which wanted a stronger position as for the Merkel during the finance crisis. So we have to be very careful. The idea today that a common financing, and once again with the situation that we have in Italy and France and in some countries, is an idea which should be put aside. And I also do not know why we are speaking so much about it, because this will not go on and we are losing time. On the US, let's try to have some calm discussion, because we do not have to fall in commenting all the movements of Mr. Trump, in my opinion. So it is a permanent diversion. So we do have differences in scenarios. So one scenario is that at the end of the day, US will remain in Europe, and it is not in their total interest to let us fall. Okay, so this is profitable for us, but why? Because it is more difficult to tackle the idea that maybe we are at a breaking point, and I'm using this word because probably you already saw from friends or families when a couple, one is breaking up with the other part, then there is always a moment in which the partner is not believing this thing, and this is the moment in which we are finding ourselves. So I'm not saying it is 100% happening, but we have to take this seriously, and this means that all the architecture of our safety is at risk. So it doesn't mean that we can't work, and I also say that the program for the next years will be that of work on all situations, levels, competitiveness, technology, but also defense, and also rearming. And I also appreciated the words. So I would not deny my vision. So first of all, to do common things, because the number is higher if we are all together. Then second thing is that we do not have to forget that we have huge companies. Leonardo is in Italy the first defense group of all Europe. Then we have Airbus, we have Thales, Rheinmetall, and other in Sweden, and so on and so forth. So we do have some tools. So the more common expenses we have, the more we are sharing what we are doing, and the more we are reducing the cost, and we can use the money that is not invested or thrown away in order to have some social policies. The risk in Germany that I see right now, it is not only related to the fact that Germany is becoming the new Reich, but also to the fact that they will not use this money in a profitable way because there is no planning, no wider planning. I'm not sure if you consider the final substance. There was an amazing article on the risks for our economies with our cables which are crossing the Atlantic, used by banks, by financial markets, and our companies, internet, that are crossing the cliffs, the shores of Ireland, which is a neutral country, which is going even beyond the neutrality of Switzerland, which they do not have the tools to control these factors. So it is not that we do not have any things that we can do at our level. So we have some marine force, we can maybe be of help to Ireland. So I do think that I am in favor of something in common, but what I can't bear are related to the easy things, because what we are facing are hard times, and I unfortunately agree with you. Back to Trump, my impression, my feeling, but please let me know if I'm wrong, is that in order not to irritate Trump and for the fear of being left alone on the security, European Union is that they are giving up some regulations, and I'm mentioning the legislations that were passed during this last mandate on, for example, digital market and also on the digital services. So the laws that are aiming at defending the competitiveness in digital and also quality of information, transparency, democracy in the virtual world and digital world. And I am referring to the report of European Union opened on Elon Musk and on the platform X, which is a platform. 2 weeks ago or less, we heard that Holocaust is just an invention. Then the chat box of X is campaigning openly for AFD, and then which characterize themselves for other facts which can be discussed along, and this point is not reaching to an end in Brussels. In the press conference room, we are very much committed to this cause because we are seeing some shyness of the European Union, so in order to, for some fear of not irritating US, they're keeping this aside. So are you agreeing with me, or am I exaggerating a bit, which I do sometimes? So the situation with Trump is a bit confused because we speak about United States, and when we speak about US, we think in $1,000 billion because US is a huge country with an economy which is huge, even huge, with investments in Europe of $17,000 billion. But this is incredible. But Trump is not thinking about that. He's thinking about billion or $100 million. And when we speak about Trump, then we always have to consider billion and 100 billion. That's the reason why X is so important to Trump, because X can lose $100 million in 1 minute if compared to the European Commission. And this is important to Mr. Trump. He doesn't think about the 1,000 billion, so he thinks about peanuts, about the things that he can take away as a business discussion, and everything is related to that. And for European Union, this is incredible because it is not possible to think that we can break up all the relationships for then $1,000 billion. As for a small company, as for X is a small company. It is relatively small, but Trump can do that, and for this reason, he is unrational for Europeans and all the balanced and posed situations, and people are fearing him and all these kind of people, and they want to have some rules because, and I do agree with that. Mr. Trump doesn't want rules, he wants some uncertainty because this is the basis of his power, of his fear. He is controlling the uncertainty. And when Europeans are saying it is not possible to go against our rules, he says, yeah, perfectly yes, because going against your rules, this is my power. And when you see Trump in this way, then you see that immediately, because the agreements with Trump are not agreements. So in the moment in which you think that the agreement was concluded, then he is changing that, because this is in his own power, this uncertainty. And I'm saying that because I do completely agree on the fact that there is some break of trust between US and the Europe. But it is not some random scenario, so it is something intentional. Trump wants to break this kind of trust, and this is the problem. So we have to live in a world in which United States do not want to be trustworthy. It is strange. Also saying that this is also strange. But if they do not want to be trustworthy, we have to solve the problems as Europeans alone. And I do completely agree. So we can't solve these problems if we spend money of other states. And when Italian or French people and German people is always thinking that Italian and French want to spend money of other people and of other states. But we have to admit that this money belongs to us as a whole group, and we have to spend this money as our money. This is the problem. So if we say to German people that we are spending their money as we do with ours, we have to say, oh my God, then the problem is that Europe is very fragmented. The fact is that we have today here in Milan, but also I have to say that I'm not satisfied with what the Commission did, but I tried to explain what happened, so what the Commission did right now or before. So when Ursula von der Leyen had the agreement on tariffs, so it was not an agreement on tariffs. It was an agreement, a negotiation in which she had a mandate of the majority of the European Union to be negotiating to those who are guaranteeing the safety of this country. So you are going to speak to the policemen which are charged with your security. So you can't say, I want to do something bad to you. And every time that I speak to some Polish people or some people from the Baltic regions that say they feel as they are already at war. And this is a problem because they are intelligent and they do know that this dependency is not healthy, this is not what they want. And also the fact that you gave your safety to someone who is no more trustworthy than you are alone. And for this reason, we have to stop to speak about the U.S. of Trump. We have to start working immediately on what we can do to be stronger without provocation, so without comments, without breaking the relationships that were unavoidable up to this moment. And we have to do everything which is possible for us. We consider the Ukraine, for example, this team had demonstrated an extreme huge power. Also, our countries during the COVID pandemic did some things that we didn't think we were able of. So we do not have to consider the world as we can't say anything, we can't do anything. It's very much complicated. Our national interests. I hate you. You gave out a lot of money, more money than we did. So we have to work for these solutions, maybe this artisanal approach, so to say, but gain the biggest quantity, biggest amount of time possible without provoking Trump, but also without avoiding some things. Because we mentioned the digital laws, and I am afraid of what we did on the Green Deal. For example, on the Green Deal, then we also had some ransom from some blackmail, sorry, from Trump, because they are producing these things. They do not want to consider consequences. But another thing is climate change, which is going on. So we saw what happened in Sri Lanka. Everywhere right now, when there is some heavy rain, this is heavier than ever. Everywhere the level of the sea is increasing. Everywhere we have some water scarcity. So if we do not consider climate anymore, then we are going dead again. And you also mentioned something that the Commission, from der Leyen Commission number 2, is going in a different direction, because they are speaking about this simplification, but this is a step back as for the Green Deal, whereas China is doing better as for energy transition. We were the leaders in that on a global level. Professor Capoccia, so at the end of the day, back to what I was saying at the very beginning before I introduced Ferreira, the title of our debate gives us the opportunity to consider Europe from a double perspective, which is very much complicated in the global scenario and landscape, but also with internal pressures. Maybe, as Gula said, maybe we have to work on ourselves and not only consider ourselves. This is always the key in order to solve some personal problems. And back to a sentence that I always mention in all debates that was said by an ambassador, which is related to the fact that the problem is that we have half Europe which is expecting Russian soldiers, the east and northern parts, and another Europe of the southern and the western Europe which is expecting Russian tourists. Maybe the problem is that this link, this European link, is no more there. This can't be recovered. Yeah, what I said before, it is difficult to have a link if all discussions are then mitigated on a national level, and then we have the priority given to some national aspects, if not considering the problems of the states. So back to what I said about communication, because it is crucial to me. It is true that X is a small company, but as for social media in general, not only X, they underwent a transformation that we should like to consider in this way, considering like the implications for the things that we are mentioning. So at the very beginning, the fragmentation of communication, so the reduction and the fragmentation of communication landscape of the social media seemed to increase a lot. But what happened during these last 10 years is that we have a new phase of social media, which is that of concentration. So we essentially have some oligarchs, and thanks to some algorithms that are managed by these people, they are deciding what people received in terms of information or reports of interpreting and so on. And there was a period some months ago in which this came to light in a very acute manner, in which it seemed that both Musk and other representatives were committed to this changing process in Europe with the support to AfD or other situations, and in their opinion, so they were doing their own interest. So I'm not sure this stopped, and this is continuing, maybe not under the spotlight. And it is also true that Europe is weak. As you said, these laws were just put into a drawer and not applied completely because of the weakness of the Europe that we have on this safety and security approach. And I also agree on what you said about working on that, of being aware on the fact that there is a scenario which is the more likely one, in which Europe should work on security, and time is of the essence because we need years to go there and the threat is there. So it is a temporary compressed period in which European Commission is doing everything in order to recover the advantage and disadvantage. And only to add some other things, if we mention X, considering this algorithm communication of some oligarchs in Brazil, for example, X was banned because it was not compliant to the rules set by the government. So this is possible. It is not impossible. So there is not a regulatory barrier which is not allowing us to restrict or to put a fine on the communication through the internet space or media online space. In Europe, this wasn't done thanks to the weakness part of Europe if compared to America. Yeah. So I also add other things, but then this is diverting our attention. So the key of the victory of our big tech is making us feel in a positive way with the social networks and to defeat these difficult ideas. I would like to say something. I do not use social networks. I do use sometimes LinkedIn for some professional reasons, but do we actually need social networks? Do we need to spend hours of our time on this platform? So in my opinion, the best reaction would be that European citizens would say, let's take a short holiday, so let's call 3, 4, 5 hours for the youngest generation. If we avoid spending these hours on the smartphone, so we can talk again to children, to friends, and not being at a restaurant with someone looking at the smartphone. So sometimes I do have the feeling, are you actually in love as a couple? There are two people there, and what should I do? So companies are considering very closely what clients are doing and what customers are doing. So you do have huge power in your pocket. So it is not against. And Pocha spoke about communication, so I wouldn't create a campaign against the US, but I would create a campaign for freedom. And the very same thing, do we actually need to buy like a third T-shirt on chain, or instead of supporting the shop in the street in which there is a funny and nice person which is taking care of elderly people? Do we want that this reality survives? In that case, we go to shops. So do we need to get to these these packets at home? Don't we have feet and legs which we can use to collect these things? The idea is that of reducing our consumption, and this should be brought to the European level for music, culture, reading, family life, for everything. Also for sleeping, but sleeping without being interrupted by the smartphone. And also maybe this is the key, making this debate matter in the campaign as an ordinary point, not we are doing as this evening the extraordinary things, but there is something that we didn't tackle yet, which is part of the future of the European Union. So the widening of European Union to other countries. We know there are some countries which are at the first positions. Then we have Ukraine, Albania, Montenegro, and I say that because Ukraine has a different way. So we have a huge state, a huge country which is bigger and heavier than Albania and Montenegro. So what is your idea on that point? So considering that the widening to the east part brought us to some problems that we can't hide under the table, maybe there were some problems that we didn't manage right now. Maybe we can try not to repeat the error. So in this phase, I always get the doubt that Orban would say no to the entrance of Ukraine, but maybe is doing the hard work for others that are afraid of splitting the agriculture funds in 28 and not 27 countries, so the slice of the pie is becoming smaller. Do you see these things and implications? I'm starting from you, as you prefer. So this is the topic. Please. Yeah. So there is one thing that we have to remember. First of all, when we expanded to Eastern countries, the two best candidates were Hungary and Poland. And so there was a problem with our regulations and rules for the expansion, because the first two countries, then the two best became the worst. What do we think about that? What do we think about the situation right now? So it is not about an expansion, it is about working together with them against third realities, as Silvia mentioned at the beginning of the speech. So we must work closely with them, with Ukrainians, with Balkans and Moldovan, and we have to work closely. We have to put some trust in their governments, and the question is, what is the best solution to work together, to learn their trust, to gain their trust among ourselves. We don't speak about expansion, but we have to speak about the close relationship between Europe and these countries, how we will build these relationships. So this is the question, and when we solve this problem, then we can work together with them against third parties. And this is one of the reasons why we are speaking about this topic right now. This is a simple thing in a way which became something very much difficult and complicated, because we are speaking about the expansion, and we know that they are not ready to be member states, but this doesn't mean that they are not ready to be with us against others, against third parties. So this is what we have to remember. Goulart? A difficult and complicated matter. I have my doubts. I spoke about that in a book which is Grande da morire, the title. So big to die, and as Eric said before, is if we can have some closer boundaries with these and connection with these countries, and this is positive. But had representatives and government representatives decided already 2 years ago, that was December 2023, to open the door to these countries, and they are holding some speeches. And we are, for example, in the theater, then we have the family, and all the possible promises of politicians, so you know what I mean. But also the fact, in practice, they didn't create a single page in which they are stating what are the most important reforms for ourselves, not for them, because we always consider the fact that they are able, if they are adapting, if they are ready, but the heterogeneity linked to the number of countries is something that we can't underestimate. And also, again, this evening, the funny thing is that we spent some part of the meeting speaking about West Europe or East Europe. We do not have the same vision anymore, so we are already a bit of victim of heterogeneity. But then we are saying, okay, let's put 10 more. And then, most of all, this is the official position of the Prime Minister of Italy, is we can't reduce the veto right, so deciding at the unanimity at 35. So let's say if we go to the very say to which restaurant we go together, this is just an example, 35 people here, there is a person who would like to go to Chinese cuisine, then pizza, then we have a veggie. So we have to take Europe in a serious way. So if we consider that in a serious way, we can't have wonderful promises, then we do not have the solution to act, because for a country as Ukraine or Moldova, in which there is like a stunning situation, and we are coming there with some promises which are not ordinary for these countries. Even more, as you said, for agricultural common policies, we need a reform, because agriculture, intensive agriculture, is polluting every one of us. And this is representing my passion as for nature. So we are ready, because we are welcoming this huge agricultural country to reform our other situations. But at this moment, I only saw people who wanted to take care of our funds. So the problem again is not represented by other people. We are the problem, and our ability of creating some trust, solidarity, and to work together. So when I see the state of the relationship between France and Italy, I do not think that we have to put some 10 extra countries, but we have to work more on prejudices and in what is not helping us in going further together. Professor Capoccia, also on the expansion, there is a lot of propaganda which is not considering the problem, as we are saying. Yeah, maybe this will not contribute to the power of the debate, but I do agree with what you said, because I do agree that if we expand this to a certain other number of countries, to Ukraine, which is a huge country, has all the consequences described by the colleagues. So then there is the need of having a different institutional reform in the European Union, which seems to be impossible. So it seems to have a lot of propaganda, not to speak about the most important and urgent matters that we do have in the EU as other things. So it is not a matter of a series of economic consequences. The countries that we are mentioning are poorer and are different if we consider also that related to the eastern part of Europe. So those who also follow the discussion about France, not only, but let's consider France, as for the import of products from Ukraine, there were some in the past some consequences. There was some import in order to help Ukraine, and this had a lower price if compared to French products and prices. Then there were some consequences, so not only for the value per se, but also for the symbolic meaning as for this approach, if compared to the French realities that could benefit from that. So also, those who are representing the countries can be affected by the consequences. And other than economy, we have to consider the countries that we mentioned that are worth visiting. And this is working in a different way, in which we have democracies which are different, then narration is also different. And then they also said that these have a different approach if compared to the Western countries. Then parties are more customized, and there are different trends which are also present in older situations. So expanding that is also creating a diversion as for other needs that we have to consider in due time, and also economic consequences and political consequences will be there. Then if Orban is going to the government saying specific things that should be considered as a consequence of what I just mentioned, then representatives in the government are then considering by the situation there. And I also agree this is not the moment dedicated to discuss these points, but we can tackle that to have good relationship. But okay, thank you. We also have the Middle East, but I do think that Middle East is the mirror of the inability of European Union to act some hegemony or to take part to global discourses and global speech. So you are surprised that no, this is just a statement, but it seems important to speak here in front of scholars. In treaties, we never wanted to had a common external policies, so we left the competence to national governments. So we can't attribute the guilt to Europe of what we didn't want to let Europe do. So you agree with me that there was some expectation towards European Union, something positive, but there are some discourses. I'm coming from the country which is full of contradictions. France is related to Europe puissance without ever accepting to start sharing some prerogatives and situations. At the end of the day, so it is not to be negative, sorry for interrupting you, but as for the currency, we can agree or not. We said we wanted a common currency. We have a unique currency, a single currency, and a central bank in which we have the representatives of different national banks taking part in the decision. And then we have one person which is going to the press conference. Today, Madame Lagarde or Lagarde, maybe tomorrow another one. And we have some credibility on that. So if we want to be trustworthy as for external policy, we have to start to create a common external policy in which we will only discuss, as I say, when I was working with the French governor, with the Central European Bank, in which we have the European law which is experienced live, then we get to a decision, and the decision is a common one. But then if we do not start to share and also to make still some national situations, then we are in a contradiction. So I am insisting on that the guilt is not to Europe, is related to that. So don't ask Turkey to prepare Christmas. So default, the guilt is for the states which are not so generous as for common interests. Maybe we do have a very short moment for questions, not very long interventions, please. Thank you. So I have a question which I started asking 3 years ago when I started university, and I continue asking myself, and I do not have an answer yet. So I fortunately had many different opportunities to follow different speeches, conferences related to European Union, related to European policies. This is my areas of interest, and this is my dream to work in the European Union. And very often I notice an institutional approach which is not represented by a bottom-up logic, but is not so much related to the population and the audience, to the awareness of citizens. So I'm coming from two different realities. I attended a scientific high school in which there is not a word of politics, both European and national level. Then I also started my bachelor's in European studies, in which there were a lot of political awareness which was brought to our attention on a daily basis. And then I'm asking myself why we are not considering, this is what I noticed, why do we think at a certain point we will have some right governments which have some positions against Europe that are not thinking about Europe integration, but maybe they are forgetting that someone voted for those European parties or against Europe, or not European countries or parties that will take the power in Europe. And then back to what you said about communication. So how do we expect that there will be some European awareness on a citizens level if these data are filtered by optic fiber wires that are part of a third data? Then this is the topic of my thesis. And the first thing that Russian people did once they went to the Crimea region is cutting the optic fiber wires that were connecting this region to Ukraine and connecting them to Russian data. And so information was filtered by Russian governments and are right now also limited to the Russian limitations. My question is, why do not we start from bottom-up policies with the aim of creating an European identity on an internal level, and then we will move only a second moment to the external policy? So what are the starting point to do that? Who wants to answer? Very short, and then we close. So I do think about the things that we have at the institutional approach. We start thinking that we have this thing called Europe that can be identified with these things about institutions. And we are asking why these institutions are working in this way instead of other things. So I do agree with that. The problem is that of identifying, starting from the bottom to the top, the attitude, the approach that are building Europe. So I'm from Texas. When I came here and I was speaking with French, I learned French first time, and I spoke to them. They have a specific idea of Europe, but this is not the idea of Norwegian people. So it is not the shared European idea with Danish people. So when we speak about Europe, we have to ask ourselves if everyone is speaking about Europe in the very same way. I spoke with a defense ministry of the Netherlands, and he told me it was a tragedy putting Greece people in Europe. They do not have a word for Europe, and I thought, but this is ridiculous. So they invented Europe. But then, according to this person, they were not representative of European. From the bottom up, it is difficult because communication is not created through optic fiber cables, but this is taken away because we are speaking about different metaphors with different concepts and ideas and in different languages. And this is difficult to have this bottom-up approach in Europe without speaking together. Very shortly, France is the product of centuries of work to create France. If you read Tocqueville, l'Ancien Régime, La Révolution, it is very clear. See, France was always. It is not true that France was always a centralized state. There was always an effort of the monarchs, different situations with different things related to the approach, and then we can also mention the unification of Germany, of Italy. Maybe it's more or less the same thing, but probably with less coercion. So I do believe that we do not have enough education not to be the small children as for communist systems, but to give the key to the culture, the transcultural work. It is not possible to manage a team or a group of collaborators of different countries without learning how we could do that. So I wrote Europe for Dummies. The most obvious thing is the time for lunch. I had people from Finland, Spain, and Greece when I went at the European. If I had first breakfast at 7 a.m., Northern Europe was very happy. Then Spanish were just came in a different way. Spanish wanted to have dinner at 10, and Finnish people, they're sleeping at 6 p.m. So this is no joke. We have to work to learn on that. I'm not pessimistic because when I learned German in Marseille, if you wanted to have a German newspaper, you had to go to the station, and there was only the FSZ of the previous day on the morning. So your generation has access to everything, to a lot of information. You can read news for free in different languages. So we do not have to complain. We have some tools and instruments. We miss some things, and for the things from the bottom up, just do it. This is what I say. So this is also coming from the society. So we do not have to ask the European Commission, to ask the campaign, to say to the citizens what they do have to do. Slow food was born in Italy with a bottom-up approach. We have like the ban of our social network. You can start with your friends. So the bottom-up is bottom-up, really. But the bottom-up, which is asking to the government to help them in a certain way, is no more a bottom-up. Professor, to you the closing words. So I am even more pessimistic than the words of this student that asked this question, because I do think that this is a common space. So this is not there also for citizens, but also for elites. So I do not think I'm wrong if I say that the magazines that we have representing it is The Economist, which is against integration or against Europe, which has a very British point of view, which is not representing the priorities of the continental integration. So there is a shy try of the newspaper, which is Le Grand Continent, which is actually trying to put in together different perspectives and languages of European countries, but I do not know how many copies they are selling. So it is true that this is one of the important building sites of internal reforms, that of creating the conditions for this. The European situation can be indicated from the top, and this public sphere should be carried out by the society, by the company. So it is a difficult one, a long one, but this is also related to some things, and also getting back to the situations that we mentioned before as the metaphors. Those are like the products of a political debate which is limited to the things which are not considering all the situation, which are not giving enough power to European problems. So this is just to wish you a good continuation. Thank you to our guests, our Fondazione Feltrinelli. See you next time. Thank you.